The left redefine. The left undefining the English language is no new thing. They've been doing it for decades at this point, and it's no surprise that the institutions are continuing to go along with it. But the most recent example of the left undefining a term happens to be with the word female. Of course, they initially were coming at it with the idea that we'll redefine the word woman to mean nothing, but we won't go any farther than that. You see, something like female is something that is directly connected to the biological sex aspect of the gender and sex differential that they pretend exists. And so they said that female won't be touched, it'll be totally fine, but that has changed quite recently, with now female also being redefined into nothingness. Of course, all of these definitions that they do, even in professional dictionaries like Merriam-Webster, are simply not definitions by, well, definition, because all of them are circular. Of course, in the case of Merriam-Webster, they have the good sense to at least try to hide the circularness of the definition by claiming that it is the opposite of something else, which of course is also defined as the opposite of the original thing, in this case being male. The problem with this is, of course, that language does not exactly work this way, though the leftists will not hear it. You see, in the comment sections that you'll find, even potentially under this video, in response to people claiming that the left has been manipulating language in an attempt to win over arguments that they have no right even having, you will see many people on the left saying, language evolves, and saying that this is an organic change that is happening to the language, that now female simply means nothing because that's what everyone wants it to be. Of course, they have to completely ignore the statistics that actually do not bear this out on any level, but on top of that, they are being incredibly dishonest with how language actually evolves, because you see, when it comes to things like slang, say the word sick, there was no philosophical or social scientific treatise on why sick needed to have a new sense, meaning something that is particularly impressive as compared to its original sense of someone being ill. That was not something that happened. It didn't come from on high upon the college degree pedigree. It came from the bottom up. It came from different subcultures that were redefining the term basically individually and then catching fire among themselves. Basically, word virility. It's the same sort of concept. And compare this to something that has more artificial changes, because in reality, there are two types of changes when it comes to language, both the natural type, which we've already explored, and also the artificial type. That would be something like regulation. You see, regulation back in the day, if you've ever heard any arguments with regard to the Second Amendment and its particular wordage, you will know that regulation in the time of the 18th century referred not to the sorts of government restrictions which it now refers to today, but instead to the well-working order of something. Essentially, if something was regulated, then it was, well, regular, as that is the root word, meaning that it worked well. Simply that it was normal, regular, functioning. Instead, that changed at the beginning of the 20th century, with it being introduced into the idea that government restrictions and government law, and all law in general, can be termed as regulation, because the idea was that the more law you put into place upon the market or upon basically anything, a lot of this was used to justify progressive policies at the time, the more you did that, the more regular the industry would become. The idea was that the more regulation you put on the currency, the more regulation you put on industry, the more stable it would be. Of course, in the aftermath, you discover that is not exactly the case, but it stuck in the public consciousness, and that is where we are at today. A similar thing is now happening, of course, with the word woman and all of the sorts of gender ideological wordage that gets used upon the terminally online. Of course, many people in the normal culture, people who exist in real life, do not use the words this way. And in fact, when it comes to polling, a vast majority of the country doesn't believe in any of this nonsense anyhow. Of course, even with that is even with the fact that polls are faked and people do not like to even reveal their deeply held beliefs to pollsters. I mean, there is a lot that simply doesn't play here. Of course, and I'm not claiming that the leftists are mistaken when they say that that this is evolving organically and that Newspeak has come into place completely naturally through natural evolution of the words. No, that's not what they're not mistaken. They aren't fooled. They don't they aren't in some sort of den of ignorance. They know exactly what they're doing, and I claim that they are doing all of this on purpose, all right? The left is dishonest, and as I've pointed out in the past and will continue to point out in the future, there is nothing in leftism that differentiates a lie from the truth. And another good example of this that happened just today, and was quite convenient for me to see today, was Ilhan Omar and AOC faking being arrested. Oh, that was beautiful. Them holding their hands behind their backs, pretending that they were handcuffed, was a wonderful show just to see how far the left will go in blatant lies about the whole thing. Of course, there's even evidence from prior to the actual event that their staffers were in fact planning on the two to be arrested in the first place, and among other things that are still developing as of now, so I won't exactly mention, other than things which I know for a fact happened and can confirm to some extent. Anything else on that front I think will be covered in greater detail later. But suffice it to say, the initial video in which they pretend to be handcuffed, and except for at the end where they lift up their fist, apparently forgetting that handcuffs are supposed to limit your range of movement, those videos are not exactly portrayed accurately, particularly not in media, where many of the mainstream media, for the first about 15 minutes of the story before people started seeing the full videos and all that sort of stuff, were trying to portray it as though AOC and Ilhan Omar were actually handcuffed, as opposed to pretending to be so. It's incredibly dishonest, though it is, as with many things on the left, technically true in that, yes, Ilhan Omar and AOC were holding their hands behind their back while these pictures were taken. Though they'll try to use this as a claim that somehow they're not being dishonest with their framing. Of course, that's exactly what dishonest framing is, when you when you frame something to create a dishonest implication and try to imply a lie, even if you aren't going to outright do one. And that is something that happens within language all the time. They have been trying to push the idea that any leftist advancement of no matter how radical it is simply the normal position that has always been the case throughout all of time. Take, for instance, the fact that we have gone from California voting down gay marriage in something like 2008 or 2012. I forget exactly when. I think it was 2008. By a fairly wide margin, to less than 10 years later, Obergefell happens, and then 7 years on, the idea of anyone being against gay marriage is simply unthinkable to these people, and they have gone as far as they possibly can in this. And it's gone to the point where now they're trying to codify homosexual marriage, or homosexual marriage, it's not actually marriage, into federal law. Of course, why would they have to codify something into law that's codified into the Constitution? Well, you wouldn't have to if it actually was. It's kind of funny to see them try and do this sort of thing and limit, and in some ways shoot their own legal arguments in the foot, because, well, their initial idea is that gay marriage is implicitly protected in the Constitution somehow. But at the same time, we need to codify it in federal law for some reason, despite the fact that even if it was codified in the Constitution, Congress wouldn't be able to make a law about it anyway. That's how things in the Constitution tend to work, is if it's in the Constitution, Congress can't make a law about it. But hey, that's just leftists being dishonest, and, well, all that really means is that it's a day ending in Y, and That's about it. I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do subscribe down below and check me out on other platforms. I'm on BitChute, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, I'm on Brighteon, I'm on Minds, Gab, and Getter for all those text posts that I never post. And if you want to check all those out, my links are down in the description. I suggest you go check them out. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily. Don't be square.